My name is Martin Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this fifth webinar in our series looking at retrofit, repurposing and refurbishment. And it's been an interesting few sessions. We're now more than halfway through. We've got two more to come after this one. And today's focus is very much on innovation, innovative briefs and initiatives. Emily's raised her hand. Emily, let's have a look. I've got a feeling that Emily may have logged on as a participant rather than as a panel member, which would explain why we can't see her. So
I've just asked John to resend her the link.
John's on his lunch hour, Claude, so that won't work. But I can probably promote her. So I'll just finish off the introduction. So we have today's innovative briefs and initiatives, and we've got Emily Knight, who isn't joining us face to face at the moment, but she will be joining us shortly from the Architectural Heritage Fund. Jonathan Wilson, who is on screen from Situ Climate Innovation District in Leeds. And then we've got Simon Baker from the Leeds-based architects group Ginger. So they'll all be speaking. I think they'll all be showing slides, giving their own perspectives on this topic. What I will do, so we can sort out the technology for Emily, is I'll ask Jonathan to go first, and then we can sort out Emily whilst Jonathan's speaking, if that's okay. So usual format. If people want to ask any questions, do so through the chat function. We'll try and pick that up as we go along, and then mop up at the end if we've got time. But Jonathan, over to you to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
We can.
Fabulous. Let's just see if I can put it in slideshow mode. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Fabulous. So firstly, huge thank you for the invite to speak at something that is actually so important and integral, particularly where we find ourselves today in the middle of a climate emergency that is actually still full of opportunities, and something that we take very seriously. So today I'll talk through actually one of our catalyst projects and exemplar projects in Sheffield, where we really look to find innovative ways of retrofit and repurpose. It would absolutely be incorrect if I didn't start by introducing ourselves as Situ. We're a Yorkshire-based developer. However, we pride ourselves on being placemakers and pride ourselves on looking at different ways in which we not only create great places, challenge the status quo, but alongside that, change the way and the model in which we deliver these places through actually amazing people and a great culture. We're here to help any city we work in help accelerate the change to how we actually become zero carbon. Little Callum is a project that we started, it feels now many years ago. Little Callum has been not only a place that has been close to our heart, but also it's a place that I was speaking to someone yesterday on site, and they said it was one of the biggest R&D projects they'd ever seen, and that was very much based upon the fact that we as a business have developed as we developed ourselves through the project, and it's a project that we're very proud of. The same principles still apply to everything we do today, whether we're working in Leeds or Sheffield, but is that we've got to change the way in which we live in our cities. We've got to change a lot of our behaviours. We have to start thinking a lot more locally, but actually our mission from day one at Little Callum was how can we use this project to change people's behaviours without forcing them down the track. So changing the way in which people live through design, through great places, through making sure that we don't silo the way in which we design our places, but actually we look at a very integrated place. We're in a climate crisis. I'm pretty sure everybody on this call will know of this problem, but actually we still believe, and we still have a lot of hope that there are many different opportunities out there in how we can tackle this, but we have to do it together. It's very simple. Little Kelham total across the 3 phases, about 250 new homes, integrated into some of the existing buildings that I'll come on to, and then woven into that carefully a 50,000 square foot of existing buildings that actually, when you start at master plan scale, they're the assets. How do we work around these amazing assets to rethink our places? I've used phase 1 and 2 at Kelham, in Little Kelham. The buildings identified in red there are the existing buildings, and these are the assets that we very much try to weave the rest of the development into. To sort of run over our principles, number 1, don't ever compromise on that vision or performance of our buildings. The moment that we do compromise on that vision, we often end up very quickly ending up back in the status quo, often back in the problem, not the solution. We remove cars from landscapes. We hide them if they're needed at all. And to actually have very purposeful historic gems that sit, as I said earlier, as being very much the thing we stitch the new into. Challenge the status quo. Let's be okay about breaking the rules right now and remaking them. If ever there's a time for innovation and challenge in the world of retrofit, particularly, and new builds, it's now. And then finally, and certainly probably the most important, don't forget about people. Don't forget about space, don't forget about light, don't forget about materials. These are often the things that can get missed, and certainly people. Without people, you don't create great places. We had a series of existing buildings at Kelham. We had Green Lane Works, Grade 2 star listed building, Eagle Works, it was an old steel works, and Green Lane Works. We had Gateworks, again, some more of Eagle Works, but as you can see from these images, there are details, materials, and spaces within these buildings that would be very hard to design into some of our buildings that we deliver today. So this was these buildings are fundamental to the development and growth of Little Kelham. Again, when we really simple principles when looking at these buildings is, firstly, let's protect them, but also respect them. There's definitely a huge tension between how we get buildings to be retrofit to, say, passive house standards, to the highest level of performance standards, whilst giving it that level of respect and protection. The obvious thing to do from a performance point of view is to wrap the building up and cover away all those hidden gems. And the obvious thing to do from a protection point of view is to not do anything, and to leave the building with a real performance gap. So we worked hard on that, on how we deal with that fabric first approach. Usually working very hard with heritage consultants to find a way in which we could either interject a level of insulation or come into some form of compromise where we would insulate and wrap the building on the inside or the outside, very simply. All the buildings just shown previously, they all ended up with a district heat biomass to where there was a performance gap and we did require an element of heating. We would include biomass all occasions. I think to sort of move on to, I guess, a bit of the how, is that when tackling some of these existing buildings, a lot of the time the status quo will tell you to cover things up. It will tell you to do exactly what I said earlier, wrap it away. And we had a steep learning curve historically where we've handed across these very delicate buildings to main contractors, and very quickly you lose the delights, you lose a lot of those details, and unless it's managed on a sometimes hourly basis, the asset effectively falls apart. So we had to come up with a new model. This is a shot of the model, very operational in Leeds, which was about bringing, firstly, employing the teams who are delivering these buildings direct into situ, giving them a sense of ownership, giving them some stability in a world of construction that often lacks stability. There's often a lot of uncertainty about where people go next. So we employed them direct, and then we've worked hard with what we call the situ squads to make them multi-skilled. The team in front of you there, we've got 2 apprentices, 2 joiners, electrician and a plumber, and they work on any of our buildings from start to finish. So they take ownership, they celebrate those small wins on a weekly basis, and when there is some failures or challenges, or they collectively get together and resolve those. Throughout the builds, in particularly some of these existing buildings, the unknowns pop up, certainly a lot more than when in a very controlled new build environment. And by having them employed direct within a culture that is up for dealing with those challenges on a daily basis, we were able to very successfully work our way through getting through these buildings. And I guess, going back to my point earlier, buildings that are now fully in use, fully operational, they're very successful. The majority of the tenants and people who moved in have stayed there, and it's forming now part of a thriving and new neighbourhood in Sheffield. I think, just to conclude, and it's always important. You can see these existing buildings in the background there, to make sure that when you are colliding new and old, that level of respect is adhered to, and that's both in the new projects as well as it is in the existing. Retrofit is certainly harder than new build, and I think it's harder because it comes with its assets on day one. We're moving on to another project in Sheffield that has almost triple the amount of existing buildings, and we aim to find new solutions, more innovation. We have a product manager in-house at situ, just looking at how we can find the absolute sweet spot between the performance gap and the design, and I guess the beauty of these existing buildings. And it's a journey we're still on. I hope and will insist that we remain on that journey for as long as we exist, because I think there's always the ability to continuously improve. Hope that's helpful. And just to finally, I guess, to say, going back to my point at the beginning, that these things and change and innovation require us all to get together and very much be the change. So hope that was helpful. I'll stop sharing now, Martin.
That was really helpful and really interesting. Thanks, Jonathan. You said that retrofit is more difficult than new build.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, comparing what you did in Sheffield with what you're doing in Leeds, which is entirely new build, I think. What from almost from a sort of the offer that you're making to the potential customers. How is that? What is the difference between what you've done in Sheffield and what you present to customers, where you have, some people might say slightly more interesting because there's something already there, and that's potentially something that people say that's quite interesting, blending the old with the new. But on the other hand, a blank canvas in Leeds that you can do what you want with. So I suppose that's the plus point there. So what are the differences between those two locations, would you say, in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess if I talk about the 2 points that I think are in tension with retrofit, which is about design versus performance. I think in Sheffield, from a customer facing point of view, people naturally seem to be pulled to these beautiful existing buildings, and so that first step for the customer, and certainly our design team is sometimes a relatively easy one, because you've got a lot of the assets, you've got these great spaces, you've usually got great openings, and so the design is a lot easier, I would say, in the aesthetics point of view in the existing buildings. In Leeds, where we started with the blank canvas, really hard. We've always so far been very lucky to have a great asset being the river.
Yeah.
So although it's not
the existing asset, yeah.
So we always start by looking at where those assets are. We're yet to start anywhere where there isn't an amazing asset, whether it's an existing building or existing piece of infrastructure in the river. I guess the difference when it comes to a customer is that we still haven't the performance standards of a new build in Leeds compared to a retrofit in Sheffield. Very simply, the heat demand in Sheffield will be slightly higher on a square foot basis than it would be in Leeds. In Leeds, we're able to say that we're hitting passive house standards of performance from a heat demand, whereas in Sheffield, we're having to find supplementary ways to meet that, which is what the biomass is doing. So I think from a customer point of view, we have to tell a different story of how we've got to the outcome. It's, as I said at the end, I think bringing those two elements to the point where we can say they're both at a level of excellence is something that we're striving for.
Got a question here, actually. I don't know if anyone on the panel can answer this, which is from Sarah, who is currently working with a supplier who creates custom-made wooden window frames, many of which go on historic buildings. They're frustrated when they and their client want to put in double glazing or heritage narrow glazing in listed building, and listed building offices demand single pane glazing, even if it wouldn't have an impact on the window frames. What do you think about this? Should people be pushed down to having secondary double glazing, even if they're having the window frames replaced with reproduction windows? So it's a question, isn't it, about how far you go to adapt an old building, how far it's acceptable to change it to get other benefits, I suppose. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that.
Maybe this is one for Emily, actually, because she's more on the kind of heritage background. So maybe you'd have occasion to answer that particular question as you.
Yeah, I can certainly have a stab at it. Sure. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, actually. It's a project we're supporting in Grimsby, and they're looking at putting solar panels on their building. It's a Grade 2 listed building, but it's also joined by a non-listed building. And they were saying about they're just looking at the kind of feasibility of putting solar panels on part of the building. And of course, the sensitivities around the listed element of the building. And it did get me thinking in terms of actually, I guess it's about prioritisation, isn't it? In terms of somebody who has worked in heritage for a few years and has a real passion and love for historic buildings. That's something that I'll always have, but equally, we can't get away from the fact that we are in, I think you said, Jonathan, a climate crisis. And it's kind of, it's where does, it's what's the priority really? My preference, I guess, in that project, for example, with the solar panels, and perhaps relevant in terms of the windows, although I'm somebody from a heritage background, I think there is a very strong case to be made for example, installing the solar panels on the building. I think there are creative ways in which you can do that in a way that is still sensitive to the integrity of the building and the heritage. But we can't get away from the fact that we need to make, there has to be some give, there has to be some sort of compromise, and it's about how do we, I guess, working with the design team, working with in the project to come up with a way that in which you can do that sensitively. So I guess my feeling is that you could, it's about sort of pushing that and encouraging retrofit and adaptations that are environmentally friendly as far as possible. But I realise that is potentially a controversial sort of viewpoint to take, particularly from a heritage point of view, but I think we are in, as you say, a climate crisis. So I think there has to be some sort of compromise somewhere. Sorry, I realised, Simon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, you did wave. Yeah. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think it's always very difficult when you have suppliers promoting products, and because it starts to engender a sense of a solution. And actually, I think what you have to do when you're working with existing buildings is look at context, and the context of the whole building fabric, so that you're balancing your response across all elements, and not just looking for one element to try and solve the problem, because invariably no one element will solve it. It has to be a balance across everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think we better move on because we've got quite a bit to get through. So, Jonathan, thanks for that. We'll probably have some questions towards the end where we can bring everyone in if we've got time. But I'm going to ask Emily to go next, if that's okay, Emily. So, Emily from the Architectural Heritage Fund, you might want to say a few words about who you are and what the fund does.
No problem.
Before you kick off, I'll leave that up to you, but you should be able to share your screen now.
I'll just start sharing my screen. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely. I'll just maximise that. And apologies for the technical problems. You would think that I'd be used to Zoom by now, but anyway. So yeah, really nice to be with you this afternoon. My name's Emily. I work for the Architectural Heritage Fund, who you may have come across previously. And I work as a programme officer helping to deliver the Transforming Places Through Heritage programme. And I cover Yorkshire and Humber, but I also cover the East Midlands and the North East. So just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about this afternoon. So first I'll give an introduction of who we are, who the Architectural Heritage Fund is and what we do, and also the current grants programme that we are running at the moment. And I've taken from the grants programme a number of case studies which hopefully kind of fit into the topic of today's session. So looking at innovative briefs, initiatives under the umbrella of retrofit, refurbishment and repurposing. There'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. It may be kind of wanting to open up to a wider discussion, but the presentation certainly won't be too long. Okay, so in terms of who we are as a funder, so the Architectural Heritage Fund is a registered charity and we work UK-wide. So we're mostly remote workers and we are based within the regions that we cover. We've been operating since the mid-1970s and were originally established just to distribute loans. And from the 1970s until today, we have offered over £125 million worth of loan finance to about 890 projects. And following this, we started to offer grants as well. So we are now both a loan and grant funder, and have supported in the region of 750 projects throughout the UK. And that equates to about £10 million worth of investment. So although we are a smaller funder compared to someone like the lottery, there's still a significant amount of funding going into the sector. And the sort of work we do and our remit is we provide advice and support. So very much an early stage funder. We'll often become the first port of call for projects to speak to. And we're very much around conservation of heritage, but also sustainable reuse. So finding reuse and new uses, creative new uses for existing buildings that are adapting and serving the needs of the communities in which they sit. So it's very much around heritage impact and conserving heritage, but also around the wider social impact and how, buildings can continue to respond to the needs of the community. So the programme that we have running at the moment in England is called Transforming Places Through Heritage. It was launched at the end of 2019, will be running until March 2023. So we're in kind of the final few months now of the programme. It's part of the wider Future High Streets Fund, so central government funding, and it's £15 million worth of investments. And our specific remit in this is supporting not-for-profits. So not-for-profits to find new uses and to carry out restoration to historic buildings on high streets and town centres. And this could be anything from community-led housing through to co-working spaces, perhaps exhibition spaces, so a whole kind of remit of uses. And I've included a link to the programme guidance and happy to share the slides after the presentation so you can have a bit more of a read through if you're interested. And then before I talk about some case studies of specific projects that have been funded through this programme, I thought I'd just highlight kind of what I think are some of the principles, aims, kind of values that underpin and is a common thread throughout all the projects that we've supported. So firstly is around clearly restoration and reuse over demolition. So really the programme is about, I guess, kind of, showing that buildings that are sometimes seen as problem buildings, defined as problem buildings, actually can be an opportunity. And so it's very much about taking these buildings that have perhaps been sitting vacant for a number of years and have not been, many groups have kind of looked at different options for them. Actually, it's about supporting a group to find a new viable use for this so that they are seen as opportunities. And all the projects I think are innovative, creative, and so for example, this could be in different models that they use to take on the projects. So for example, we're supporting projects in Northampton, which is being led by the Church's Conservation Trust, and they're actually taking on a historic pub. So obviously we identify or tend to think of the Church's Conservation Trust as exclusively looking after historic churches, but actually the idea is that this pub sits next to a grade 1 listed church, and the pub will be able to provide facilities that wouldn't necessarily be able to be accommodated in the church because of its grade 1 listing, and the idea is that they will mutually support and reinforce one another. So this is a really new and innovative model that's being piloted by the Church's Conservation Trust, with the idea that this could then be rolled out to other projects. So it's very much around, innovation, thinking outside the box. I think another kind of common thread is around flexibility and being projects that are buildings that are responsive. So we're very keen to support projects and buildings that are not, they haven't got a fixed end term use. It may be that there is a really good reason for that fixed use, but also it's really good to see projects that are able to respond perhaps to different kind of environmental factors. So for example, with COVID, we've seen the need for buildings to respond and to change their use according to kind of market demand, and essentially kind of what's happening in the outside world. So around flexibility and being able to be responsive. And then finally, as I think I've mentioned, we're looking for projects that are not just benefiting heritage, but also have a wider social benefit. So it could be economic through the creation of jobs, or using bringing vacant floor space back into use, through to certainly around environmental benefits. So this could be biodiversity improvements. It could be through retrofitting a building and helping it to become more efficient. And so again, as I say, I think these are just some common themes and common threads that run through all of the projects that we've supported. So just moving on to the first case study, I thought I'd provide a before picture of the project that we supported. So this is up in Sunderland. It's a collection of buildings, and their numbers 170 to 175 High Street West. And as you can see, this was taken a number of years ago, completely vacant. It was the owner was actually trying to get these demolished, I mean, it was they weren't even really kind of safe to go in, a real sort of eyesore on the high street in Sunderland. And this is one of the after photos, so I'm sure you'll agree it looks completely different, completely transformed. So the building has been, or the project has been, led by Tyne and Wear Building Preservation Trust, and we've supported it over a number of years, from viability stage through to capital stage. Grade 2 listed buildings located in the conservation area, and from vacant buildings they have now been transformed into a really kind of multi-use flexible space, which sort of picks up on the point I made earlier about that, how positive it is for spaces to be flexible and to be able to adapt. There's record shop, gallery, space for social enterprises, a really kind of exciting, vibrant place to be now. And I think kind of what I wanted to pick out for this out of this project specifically is around the importance of collaboration. So Tyne and Wear Building Preservation Trust are not kind of the only, although they've driven the project, and they've very much worked in partnership with the City Council. So they were gifted this building for £1 from the City Council. Potbrex, who are a social enterprise or based in the in Sunderland, and they are the anchor tenants, and have been key to basically finding a viable use for the building and to make the business plan stack up. And then also Historic England have been a key partner. So it really is very much partnership working, reaching out to different groups and to the local authority, and I think that's what really has made this this project a success. So in terms of the kind of lessons learned, it's certainly the importance of partnerships. I think also in terms of the time it takes to make these projects successful. So we've been supporting it for around about 5-6 years, and that's from that kind of initial viability stage, but there was certainly work going on even before that. So it takes a long time for these projects to be completed. And then just coming back to the importance of getting that anchor tenants. So that is a really interesting project up in Sunderland. There's lots of information on Historic England's website if you wanted to read more. And then another project we supported is a little bit closer, so in Dewsbury. So this is the Arcade in Dewsbury. The project is being led by a group called the Arcade. They're a community benefit society and are partnering with Kirklees Council. It's a lovely Grade 2 listed building, late Victorian, former shopping arcade essentially, that consists of about 25 units, and the whole site is vacant. So as you can imagine, right in the centre of the town, and is just crying out for some sort of intervention. But clearly it's a huge site, and it's so kind of has to have the right approach in order to be able to take it on. What the Community Benefit Society is looking at doing is they are looking at not just having it as retail space, so kind of replacing like for like, but encouraging startups and small to medium enterprises, different kind of events and activities driven tenants. So a real kind of creative mix of community led occupants that will hopefully make this sustainable long term. And in terms of what I think makes this kind of, you know, the standout factor for this, what makes this significant and unique, is around community and governance. So this is very much being led by the community. So there will be community tenants. There's been a huge amount of consultation looking at kind of how the space might be able to be used and kind of the sorts of things that the community want to see in the arcade. And then in terms of governance, so there's organisation set up as a community benefit society, and they're working in partnership, as I mentioned, with Kirklees Council in order to, so the community benefit society have achieved preferred bidder status and have secured a 10-year lease on the site, subject to number of performance criteria. But again, it's just a really kind of interesting, sort of partnership approach with this project, that will hopefully really kind of breathe new life back into this amazing site. And then the next case study I wanted to highlight was, so this is in Lincolnshire, in Caister. The organisation leading this project is Caister and District Community Trust Limited, and we've supported this from development to capital stage. So this is actually 5 buildings, 2 of which are Grade 2 listed. So it occupies a kind of a significant portion of the market square in Caister, and all of these buildings are vacant. So what they're looking at doing is turning this into, again, a really kind of mixed use, flexible space. So it's going to include retail, offices, holiday lets, because one of the things that was highlighted in this destination management plan for Lincolnshire Wolds and is around this shortage of holiday lets. So again, it's really kind of responding to what the need is and what the demand is within this area. But we'll be able to bring back 5 buildings back into use and just make this, increase the vitality and the vibrancy of the market square. And so the kind of key thing for this, just wanted to highlight, I felt, was around, the flexibility of space, but then also creative ways of finding investment. So as a community benefit society, they are able to launch community share scheme. So it's a £2.4 million capital project, and they're looking at raising about 14% of that through community shares. And anybody who's buying the community shares, the expectation is that they'll get 3% interest after 3 years. So it's just about, I think, one of the things we want to do and achieve through the programme is about finding creative ways of fundraising, so there isn't just a reliance on grants, but there is also bringing in, leveraging in extra finance. And then the final case study to highlight was is in Massam. So this is a project that's being led by Peacock and Verity Community Spaces Limited, and just wanted to highlight this is an unlisted building, but nevertheless really significant in terms of its heritage, and it is in the conservation area within the town. It's partially vacant, so some of it is residential, but what the group is looking to do is to bring the whole space back into use as affordable housing units. And then also a tea room and an awarding style kind of counter service that's going to be focusing on zero waste, and will be kind of in the environment, and the environmental impact will have that's central to the project. And the sort of key thing I wanted to highlight with this, again, is around partnership. So they are looking to partner with a registered housing provider, and that will make the purchase of the building possible, because without that, it would be very difficult for the group to be able to cash flow that and to acquire the building. And again, it's just around these kind of creative, innovative partnerships that's going to make this project possible. So this is just kind of wrapping up. So I think as I said at the beginning, the programme is around conservation of heritage and finding new creative uses for these important assets on high streets and town centres. But also it's very much around leading to impacts beyond heritage. And so, making that case for actually reuse and refurbishment of these buildings isn't just beneficial to the heritage of the building, it's beneficial particularly in terms of the environmental impact, and then there are also wider benefits beyond this. So for example, in High Street West, I think it's fair to say that the project is very much a catalyst for the wider area. So the Building Preservation Trust, who have taken on 170 to 175 and are taking on 176 and 177. And there's a huge amount of investment going in this area, but I think that is very much kind of a key anchor project within that high street. And without it, it would, the wider area would be a huge detrimental impact if those buildings hadn't been addressed. So it's definitely very much kind of a catalyst for the wider area and for bringing in extra investments. In terms of the arcade, I think it's around, it's about representing the community. So there is significant Asian British community within Dewsbury, and the board is representative of this, and also they're looking at through the community share offer, putting together a Sharia compliant share offer, and that will be kind of one of the first that has been offered, I understand. It's just really, again, interesting kind of the creativity and innovation that is behind all these projects. And then on to the marketplace in Caister. This is very much responding to the destination management plan for the Lincolnshire Wolds, and through this it's going to have huge economic benefits. There's going to be at least 6 full-time equivalent jobs created through the project. There'll be placements for young people, and they're partnering with a number of charities to provide volunteering opportunities. So it's again, there's a huge number of positive impacts beyond just the kind of bricks and mortar. And then finally, RIAs in Masson, again, there's kind of a huge focus on skills, so not only in terms of volunteering, but they're going to have a focus on traditional building skills and looking at actually how they can show that restoration and refurb and retrofit of the building, how they can use that to actually help people within the area to improve and to learn traditional building skills. That can almost be kind of an example project that will hopefully then go on to inspire other projects to take a similar approach. And then that was everything I was going to say, so I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything at this point.
That was great, Emily, thanks very much for that. Really enjoyed that. Just a sort of a question from me, which I suppose is, how does the fund, how interventionist is the fund in terms of the sorts of schemes that people come up with from a sort of a technical point of view? So technical solutions that they bring to the table in terms of how they want to convert a building or give it a new use. How much do you sort of say yes or no, depending on, maybe choices that they make? I mean, we talked about the windows issue earlier on, so those sorts of choices which may produce a building that has a better environmental performance, but maybe has an impact on the aesthetic of the building itself. So how much do you intervene in that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think kind of going back to sort of what I said at the beginning in terms of we're an early stage funder, so we're very much kind of often one of the first funders to be involved with projects, because it's notoriously difficult to get viability funding, for example, for that really kind of early stage work. I think at that point there's that opportunity to certainly kind of help to shape projects. So we would certainly encourage things, particularly at that stage, because really if you're thinking about renewable energy, or how you go about your procurement, or what materials you're going to use, actually you need to be thinking about that straight away, rather than sort of later down the line when you're sort of at REIB stage 4 or something, and actually it's a bit too late. So we can certainly kind of feedback at that point. But what I'd say is that we aren't so we're not architects, we're not kind of part of the design team. So although we can kind of feedback and offer our advice and kind of share sort of best practice and put them in contact with other projects, it will also be kind of their design team and their project, so we wouldn't kind of have I guess it wouldn't be kind of heavy-handed in that sense, but we'd certainly be encouraging them to speak to other projects and to Yeah, I guess also just to kind of, because often these, these sorts of approaches they can be more costly in terms of time and money, but actually encouraging them that perhaps when they're going to other funders, such as the lottery, actually they would likely look unfavourably to, even though it may cost more, something that is more, for example, environmentally friendly than something that's just going to kind of replace a gas boiler like for like, for example. So it's certainly, we'd certainly kind of offer that advice, but it wouldn't be in kind of a sort of a heavy-handed way or kind of refuse things. We would also leave that up to their design team and them as sort of the project lead.
Brilliant. That's a great answer. Thank you. Anyone else want to chip in? Claude, we've not heard from you yet. And we're still not hearing from you because you're muted.
I'm keeping my questions for the end.
Okay,
that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, well, on that note, then maybe we'll move on to Simon and complete the set, and then we should have a look at the time at the end to have a little bit more conversation. So thanks, Emily, and over to you, Simon.
Okay. See if I can do this. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so Group Ginger is a small practice of architects in the centre of Leeds. In terms of looking at innovative briefs and initiatives, I'm not sure an innovative brief exists. I think it evolves, and I think things evolve in response to the dialogue that comes from a client and what they want to try and achieve, and the buildings or the site that you're working with. And in that kind of context, what we do is the opposite of McDonaldization. McDonaldization is kind of high degree of predictability to drive efficiency. And what we're looking for is the unpredictable, those moments where people can come together and we can kind of celebrate those opportunities, where we're looking at different ways of doing things. So, and sometimes they can be political statements, like trying to make a comment on the number of stalled development sites in south of Leeds that were being used as car parks, and therefore coming forward with pop-up cinemas to make use of those and highlight that, to weird and wonderful ways of reusing existing kind of heritage assets like museum gardens in York and turning that into a wonderland as part of a lighting festival. I was going to show you 3 projects. Hartlepool, which is a completed heritage project. Blackburn, which is very similar to the projects that Emily was talking about, that's on site at the moment. And then York, which is a project which is more new build, but it's a project that's on that's in planning, that's just been submitted to planning at the moment. And through those, try and show you a different part of the process each time. With Hartlepool, when we talk about briefs, the brief we had at Hartlepool was to look at an area, a kind of heritage quarter, and which had been identified as a business innovation district, and initially do a study of heritage assets and identify buildings that were suitable for preservation and could support alternative uses. And the one that we found had the greatest flexibility and that could be developed was the former post office headquarters, which had been used as hadn't been used for a long time. And its last use was as a rather salubrious nightclub. And a lot of what we do is, when we're looking at it, is actually, it's trying to see past everything that's been covered up and strip it back. So in many respects, what we end up doing is taking away more than we end up putting back. But through that subtraction of what we take away, we reveal the sort of the integrity and the honesty of the original building, and enable other people then to see how those spaces can be used. It also tends to simplify things down in terms of their kind of building performance, because you're taking it back to how the original would have worked. And it's only then that we then start to look at how we add back into that to complement the original form and bring new uses into it. And when you start having that dialogue, it's a very different way of looking at things than the way an agent will place value on a project. And generally, value is the thing that then tends to drive monetary investment. And you know, this space directly correlates to the area where we stripped out the nightclub. And in terms of value generation and rental income, this space yielded no value whatsoever, to the point that the communication we were having to have was, well, why do we need this space? But actually, this is the network social area where all of the new tenants within this kind of business incubation centre all come together and meet. And it's this social value that drives the rental value and the attractiveness of this building, and is the space that continues to secure new tenants. And it's, you know, so the way we look at things is how we can strip them back and identify things that, try and identify things that other people haven't seen, and certainly aren't seen at the outset. So moving on to Blackburn, it's it's actually what the building at the front used to run all the way down the terrace. The middle part of the terrace then collapsed and was rebuilt and replaced with 5 terrace buildings. And this is opposite King George's Hall, and the terrace had been not in use for a very long time, high level of dereliction, and ground floor units used, but roof failure and lots of building fabric failure. And a lot of abuse by tenants going in and appropriating the space for their use, but without consideration for the whole. And so the overall building condition was in a terrible state, and it was very difficult to see. So we encouraged an initial strip out to try and understand the building better, to see what was integral to it. And what we found was that we were having to take so much out to repair it that the question was, well, why are we putting it back? So in terms of the terrace, what we've ended up doing is the proposal is putting less space back in, but creating a much more dramatic and different space, connecting the high street through to the creation of a new pocket park and terrace to the rear, with then a new mezzanine going in, so that we're then expressing and celebrating the new structural frame that brings that stability to the building. Now, that all seems great until you have the unpredictability of climate change and weather and storm Eunice, at which point we ended up having to condemn the building. Well, actually, that's not correct. Prior to Storm Eunice coming, we were worried about the stability of the building, and we had to then put in place emergency measures to prop up the building, close the road, all within 24 hours, because we were fearful, we were wanting to protect life, and we thought there was a danger to the public from a building collapse. Subsequent to, so that's where we are now. This photograph was taken yesterday. We are midway through the construction process, where the roof is off, we're taking walls down, and we're discovering more and more of the poor condition of this building. And it really questions why we're retaining this building and where the value is in retaining that building. And actually, even though we're now on site, this sketch was done a week ago, because the front building has now got to be completely demolished. And the question was raised about, well, we raised the question, why are we putting it back in the same form? And should we be looking at doing something different? And if we were to do something different, can we do it in a heritage sensitive way, but can we then enhance the flexibility of the buildings that can be retained, so we preserve that ongoing future use and sustainability for them? So then looking at the kind of the last, and I suppose really the issue there is, you know, the RIBA stages and scale, you know, goes A, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the logic is that you move in this really seamless linear way. And our experience is that you don't. You get so far and then you discover something else and you didn't know that and you couldn't have known, and you have to step back. And these things take longer. You need to be flexible. The whole design team needs to be flexible. The client needs to be flexible, and collectively you all need to be very patient and willing to explore. And that dialogue, the nature of that dialogue, is something that happens on every project, and it's through that dialogue that I think you drive and develop the innovative brief. Pavers in York has just been submitted for planning. It's not a heritage scheme, but I wanted to put it in by way of a kind of demonstration of a process and an ongoing dialogue where you are evolving that brief, and it isn't this McDonaldization of, you know what you want, and therefore we're going to go to someone that's just going to deliver us what we want with that high degree of predictability. That there is an ambition at the outset to explore and discover what could come from that brief. So the brief was as an existing offices and distribution warehouse, and Pavers wanted to extend the office accommodation. And so straight away our question was, well, you know, what's the trend? Where are we in terms of kind of office culture? And did some research into that, and then also took the client to see a number of different buildings and different approaches to start to develop that space. So moving away from an open plan arrangement to looking at the integration of multiple ways of accommodating, of occupying the space, in order to, I suppose, really go back to Jonathan's point about putting people first and looking at the culture of a place that you're trying to generate, and how that can drive the nature of the spaces that we're designing, and both in terms of how we're retrofitting the existing, but then also complementing the existing in this instance with new build. And then going back to, and because this is a dialogue, it's actually using the media we've got available to us, which is nice, see things, see potential, and then create drawings and illustrations that enable other people to share that view as well. Right, and that's one of the interiors, and then following that through in terms of the kind of responsibility to how the envelope works. So actually looking at kind of timber hybrid frame, external louvers to mitigate solar gain, and mechanical natural ventilation with heat recovery. And in kind of all of these instances, taking clients through a decision process and being very transparent about what the options are that are available to them and what one decision might mean over another. And through that kind of decision process and flowchart, you get to kind of challenge conventional wisdom that, well, environmentally it would be better if we had natural ventilation. Well, actually, in this instance, because we've got a community of about 200 people, the heat gain from those people means that if we just have opening windows, then on a cold day, you'd want those windows shut, and then the air quality would go down. And it's much better and much more efficient and beneficial to the environment if we go through a mechanically assisted natural ventilation. And sort of creating kind of flow charts for people, for clients to be able to rationalize and see why we're doing things and the reasons for doing things. And that goes all the way through the project, so that we're looking at what the building size is, what the mechanical and electrical plumbing systems are, to options on the structural frame, to then looking at different types of roof, blue roof, green roof, standard, to elevation approaches, and actually engaging in a dialogue with the client where jointly we are curating a series of choices. And it goes back to that point about, we were talking about the windows. You can't make a decision about the windows without knowing what you're doing with the MEP system and what that strategy is, and how the other elements of building fabric and envelope are performing, so that you're constantly looking at a kind of whole building performance, but also the balance of, well, what's the environment going to be like, and how does that support a culture of occupation? And then hopefully that leads to a building that people feel is attractive, and at the end is applauded as being innovative. But I think that innovation comes from a client that is willing to be patient and invest time in the dialogue to make all of those informed incremental decisions. And in that way, you end up with a piece of tailored architecture that is directly in response to the brief, but is also not a kind of cookie cutter version of something that's gone before. And in order to be able to do that, I think you've got to love what you do. And this is my Bernard Chinley quote. So I should stop sharing there. Come back.
Thank you, Simon. That was brilliant. Really, three really interesting projects, and I think, you know, a really good explanation of this process of how a scheme can evolve and move in, you know, in slightly unexpected ways, and that ultimately that produces something that is better than having a predetermined idea right from day one. I wondered, Simon, if you could. I mean, the Blackburn example was interesting, I thought, because it takes some pre-existing buildings in a very poor state of repair, and then you were saying that actually the where you are now is that part of that can't be saved at all. I mean, at what point do you think the benefits of almost not starting from scratch, but, you know, taking that radical option, when do you make that decision? Because clearly in this instance, that decision has been made. Is it purely about structural? I mean, could it be rebuilt? Is it a cost issue, or is it actually that the benefits of how did you arrive at that point?
Well, with a bit of duress, I think we've done everything we possibly could to try and retain the building. The issue over kind of health and safety and structural stability meant that the whole building had got to come down, and that didn't preclude putting the whole building back.
Yeah.
The question then was, well, if we're having to rebuild it and put it back, why are we putting it back exactly the same? There's sort of architectural integrity to do something different. We're not conservationists, but equally the question was, the existing building doesn't work. That's why it's not let. So if we've got the opportunity to rebuild, surely we should be trying to put it back where we're preserving that longer term flexibility, and therefore can put something back that's different. Probably the project is better and stronger as a consequence of having gone through that process, because if we'd have started with a knockdown rebuild at the beginning, it would have looked fundamentally different than what we're going to end up with. And also, we're we're taking this down, but we're reusing all the stone corbels, all the stone gutters. We're reusing the bricks, but we're going to put them back in a different configuration. And I think that then starts to become very, very interesting, because we couldn't foresee that at the beginning, and nobody else could. And it'll end up consequently very different.
Fascinating. Claude, I'm going to let you go now. I should say, right. Claude has really masterminded this whole series of webinars, and I feel a bit of a fraud, fronting them, because really Claude is the person who's the driving force behind it. So really, you need to get your 2 penneth in now, Claude.
I'm going to. One of Simon's last words was about caring and loving what you do. And I'm going to tie this in with what Jonathan was saying about builders, and possibly, if Emily knows enough, training these young builders into more traditional skills. My question here is it just us architects, or is it a wider public? I mean, there's this myth that loving old buildings is romantic, and Simon has obviously completely unpeeled his romanticism. There is a point at which you have to make more pragmatic and innovative decisions. But the side of the builders, the people who get involved with their hands, do you know anything about them? It's probably for Jonathan, really. Yes, Jonathan, have you?
I can come back on that. In the case of Blackburn, I don't think we would be able to do what we're doing if it wasn't for the nature of the contractor that we've got on site. And actually, they have a long-standing relationship with the local authority, and they are being incredibly transparent about. We're on a traditional-based contract. So they're being very transparent about how much things are costing, what the implications are to program, therefore what increases there are on preliminaries, but they're not being overly contractual about it in terms of, oh, this has changed, that has changed, therefore we're going to have to charge you, and taking advantage of the position of the there where they could almost charge what they want. We are reliant on them wanting to do the project and being invested in the project as well. And I think, not wanting to put words in John's it's a commitment to the return.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I missed the last bit of that, Simon, but absolutely agree. I think I guess there's 2 bits to this. I guess one is just simply about the industry, and one of the things that we're trying to do is to move ourselves as best we can out of the traditional construction mentality that sometimes it feels like a real desire to push back against anything that's different and change. And I guess then layering that in with often, particularly, I guess it's a lot more aligned to retrofit and existing buildings, and exactly what Simon was saying is that in the construction industry, you very rarely understand why. It's often laced with contracts and a brief sometimes, and it actually when you are doing things differently, whether it's you're building new build to passive house standards, or you're doing something very special with an existing building, unless you really know why and you're bought into that why, and you're invested some way, shape or form into that why, then you're never going to get the best outcome. And so I think that's why we employ now 74% of the guys and girls on site, and we do that so they really bought into that why. we know from various reports that so I guess one of the startling facts is that in the construction industry, particularly the house building industry, is that it works at about 30% efficiency, and that for every 3 houses built in the UK, you could build a 4th with the amount of waste that is generated on site. And we work closely with Mark Farmer, who did that report for government to try and find better ways of doing things, and that's why we've ended up with a manufacturing facility. Within our manufacturing facility, we're working at now 89% efficiency. Our waste is down now to 8.5%. So surely I think it's very much about how we change what we do, where we build the componentry. I want to be very clear that I'm not talking modular. This is about PMV, which is the value that we can bring with building different bits of componentry off-site and then bringing it together successfully on-site. But I think most importantly, this is about culture, behaviour, really bringing the teams from design all the way through to completion on that journey of why.
Jonathan, thanks very much. We're past 2 o'clock and we do try and finish these on time. So I'm just going to ask Claude to say a bit about what we're doing next time.
Well, next time we're looking at the education sector. We were going to start with training young people in sixth form college, but they cancelled. So we'll be talking about the training architects, training professionals into learning more about existing skills. And Emily, you might want to watch this and chip in on your training for young people projects.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to draw it to a close there. Really interesting session. I really enjoyed that. This will be on our YouTube channel. We get lots of people watching our webinars on there. So just thank the 3 of you, Simon, Emily, Jonathan. Thank you, Claude, once again for joining us. Same time, same place next week. Claude doesn't know this. I'm on holiday next week, so Claude will be holding the fort. There we are. Okay. We'll see you all soon. Thanks very much.
We'll do the collaborative stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.